probably be the ones who would comprise the
Cash deficit grows.
All the hosties in their carts out there.
Anthem was closed for about 2 or 3
Well, we
days.
had a couple, I think we had 2, 3, 4 folks that were supposed to play at that, and then they
Someday.
Oh, I'm sorry.
some
I'm
other
incorrect.
people.
How negative.
Would you say Morgan Hill?
In Northampton was closed for a couple of days.
So it's rain over
It's absolutely-
time.
Whatever
So you figure Brookside, elevation wise,
Yeah.
here it's one up, and
But I don't think I did.
here, I'm sure it was a lot of sloppy.
I mean, this is, I just ran.
You
it
could
doesn't-
play if you walk. They wouldn't
I mean, you kind of have to do
Cuts out.
this, kind of assume.
You see all the opinions flying around the dinner table. Oh, they could have called in all their caddies.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, okay, and all the other tabs are there. You should do want to show them up. And I didn't put them in no because tab and no. Are we good?
We're good.
Okay, thanks,
Okay,
guys.
thanks.
And you're good on, you're good?
Maybe we
Okay, you're good on that?
extend an executive committee and focus on the bylaws.
I'll do this PowerPoint, you do the financials.
Pass the
Okay.
question and raise it with the rest of it. Okay, but then you'd obviously be a key part of that.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool, thank you.
Okay, so we should get rolling soon.
2 minutes, Ed.
Do that one Excel. See where it says present value at the top.
Although I don't see any public ones.
Make that 5.47.
Pardon me?
We need to-
We're getting tired of winning.
I want to roll. Said we were going to take it up. and we don't.
5.47. Yeah, that's it, yeah. I have it at the bottom, I just got to take it. Save it so it doesn't. And the other one, if you hit the other present value one, over there, the other tab.
Was it formally on the agenda that was advertised?
Initially, the tentative agenda had it.
So that one says 4.8, the other one is.
We always publish agendas.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
Because of this.
What I'm thinking
Yeah, is that what?
it might be a little awkward if we don't, somebody didn't mention it, so we're still working on that. Not going to go through.
Ask him if he's okay with playing with Colin and fight like Robert York, from the morning.
It's gonna take you guys out themselves.
Colin, are we ready to go? Okay, good morning, everyone. For everyone's information, my name is Ed Lozano. I'm the Vice Chair of the Airport Authority. I am sitting in place of Chuck Diakine, our Chair, who is hopefully enjoying a nice trip out in Europe, a well-deserved vacation. I do expect him, and we do expect him to be back for the next board meeting. So again, that's just a quick background. We'll start our meeting shortly, but I would ask everybody to please rise and we'll conduct our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I have some unfortunate news, and I'd like to share a statement on behalf of the Airport Authority regarding a fellow general aviation professional, pilot. The gentleman's name is Matthew A. Ryan, and you can see a picture of Mr. Ryan here on the screen in front of you. The Airport Authority and the Lehigh Valley aviation community is saddened by the sudden passing of Matthew A. Ryan, who died during a tragic accident in last week's severe thunderstorms. A 2004 graduate of Emmaus High School, Matthew's career path to the skies started at Lehigh Carbon Community College, and he also fulfilled his passion for aviation as a member of the Civil Air Patrol. Before accepting a full-time job with Delta as a pilot, Matthew served as an instructor for Gateway Aviation at Queen City Airport and taught countless people to take flight. Our deepest thoughts and condolences are with the Ryan family, including his wife Nancy, his unborn daughter, and parents, Lisa and Kevin. Let's now please pause and take a moment of silence in Mr. Ryan's honor. Thank you. And he will be in our thoughts and prayers. Okay, with that, Sylvette, if we can officially conduct our meeting, and if you can please conduct a roll call.
Yes, sir. Brian Dames. Here. Chuck Diacon. Mike Dowd. Here. Frank Facciano.
Here.
Glenn Geisinger.
Present.
John Hayes.
Here.
Larry Hemberger.
Present.
Ed Lozano.
Present.
Jeff Matskin. Glenn Riedman.
Present.
Ted Rosenberger.
Here on the phone.
Mike Schwer.
Here.
Matt Turk.
In the hallway.
What, in the closet?
Chris Worley.
Here.
And Tara Zrinsky. Here. Okay, we have a quorum.
Okay, great. We'll open up with any public comment. Seeing no public in the room, we will continue on with our agenda. So our first order of business is approval of our minutes from our last board meeting. Could I please have a motion to approve the minutes as drafted? Thank you. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, we will take a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye. Aye. Any dissenters? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Second order of business will be our reports of the committees, and we will start with our new Treasurer and Secretary, John. So pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Eddie.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'd like to report on the April 2018 financial performance of the organization. Had another strong month. This has become a very strong trend in terms of operating performance. Revenues were up 6% over 6% over, Todd, that is last year? Or is that over budget? I need to go back to calculate. Prior year.
That's prior year.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, prior year.
Yep. And net income also up substantially as well over budget, just under prior year performance. We've seen strong growth in our parking roadway revenue, non-aviation lease revenue also up, and that's due to chargeback of bank fees and increase in land rent. Monthly expenses 5% favorable to budget. Staff continues to do a very strong job in terms of expense control, in particular staffing. We have had some staff increases budgeted, which we haven't had yet the need to fill them. We have the need, but we haven't filled them yet. We've been able to manage the performance of the organization without staffing too quickly, and that's reflected in the bottom line numbers. If you go to the next slide, and you look at the year-to-date numbers, you can see strong year-to-date performance versus budget. We are behind 2017, but we are up 13% versus budget in parking and roadway revenue. That's directly due to an increase in passenger traffic, which we've seen in both legacy carriers as well as with Allegiant. We've had strong growth in both. Everyone has seen the press releases in that regard. Ground handling revenue is up. That's primarily related to Allegiant. And expenses, again, continue below budget, 5% below budget. If you look at the passenger traffic numbers, this tells what is developing to be a very nice trend. If you look at things just in terms of the Allegiant carrier, we're up 30% versus prior year. That is directly related to the additional flights that Allegiant added, which the original game plan was they were adding those flights through, I believe, the end of May, and they've extended that through the end of November. So we do expect to see strong Allegiant traffic continuing through the summer months and well into the fall. You also look at the other carriers. Our legacy carrier traffic is up 6.8% versus prior year. That's coming off a less than stellar year in 2017, where we saw legacy traffic down almost 12%. So very happy to see that legacy volume kick back in. Tom, if you could talk about that a little bit more during your comments, that would be fantastic. And everything that we're seeing, we're expecting to see those numbers and that traffic continue through the remainder of the year. Talk about some of the direct variances in terms of actual performance versus our budget. Net revenue, we talked about ground handling, parking, and aviation services activity. And also, the airfield and terminal reflect an adjusted accrual for 2017 airline settlement. Todd, do you want to explain that?
Sure. If you understand the way our business works, airfield and terminal are break even. So at the end of each year, we do a settlement, basically with the airlines, overages we give back. So we accrued, we estimated $700,000 net, and we actually charged it all to airfield. The final number came in less than that, but some of that was terminal. So the actual, for example, for airfield was like $1 million. But then we had some kind of kickbacks for terminal. So the net was 643. The good news is our landing fee, our final landing fee for 2017 was slightly below $4. So if you remember a few years back, we were at $5. We're still charging more than that, but the final number that they actually get, the net number was $3.96, I believe. So we're below $4, which is a nice benchmark to be below. So that's something we feel good about. So that just reflects it in.
Will that continue to decline, or?
That's the plan, to continue to decline, yes. I don't want to say it continue forever, because that means we got to give money back forever and ever, but no, it's a good trend, and we're hoping to continue that trend.
What would be a feel-good number there?
A feel-good number for us, we're shooting to get a number lower to 3. I mean, if we get it down to 3, we would be ecstatic, but it's going to take time. And the other piece of it is, we're doing it incrementally because we have to kind of rebuild our infrastructure. We don't want to give it all back and then be in a position where we're like, oh gosh, our infrastructure needs work, and then we got to increase the rates arbitrarily. So it is kind of strategic how we're lowering that rate.
We did some benchmarking in that regard, Larry, to take a look at where we were with our competitor airports. Comparatives are a little bit difficult to drop. Just remind me or correct me if I'm wrong. Atlantic City has a very low fee, but they don't pay for their EMS and security services.
Correct.
That's covered by either the city or the county. So they have a much lower number. We are still on the high side, but as Todd had mentioned, we have made a lot of progress in that regard. But that continues to be a focal point.
And anytime you're giving money back, you think about if somebody gives you money back, you feel good about that relationship. So that's kind of what's happening with the airlines. They get money back. They like talking to us a little bit better than when we ask for money.
Okay, to continue in regard to the decrease in expenses, we talked about lower salaries and benefits in regard to headcount. We've also had some positive timing variances in regard to rental and lease fees, as well as training and travel. That's been offset by some areas where we've run a little bit higher in terms of materials repairs, legal fees, and our pilot payments. Also, how are we in terms of snow and snow removal costs? Because we've had a lot of snow events.
Sure. If you look at our numbers for the first 4 months this year versus the first 4 months last year, we're up about $100,000. And some of that is because the multimodal is more area, and we've had more events. But again, even considering that extra $100,000, we still manage our expenses very well. So,
absolutely.
It's good news. Okay.
And then lastly, on the non-operating side, we had a $301,000 gain in regard to sale of land easements. That's obviously non-recurring revenue, but it still is good revenue to receive. So, Todd, do you want to take us through the cash flow projections and the financials?
Yeah. Main thing I wanted to point out on our cash flow, and the big things to keep in mind, you can't really see it in here because this is kind of the truncated form. You do have it in your packet, is you'll see the updated airline settlement that's reflected in June. It was $700,000, now it's $643,000, which is the final number, and they'll get that credit in June. But this kind of reflects our last kind of projection of all of our capital projects, everything we're talking about, including the hangar 11, and the flow of that money. If you look at line 26 there, I don't know if everybody can see there. I got someone over here. Right here, line 26, we're kind of restricting that money, even though it's an internal restriction for the hangars. So we got the 10 million, we can't say, hey, we can use that for whatever we want. We're restricting it there, and it's kind of systematically showing that flow all the way through. But the key thing that we added, which we really think is important, is this number down here. We're following what our cash on hand is each and every month. And at the end, we're at 62.4. Our number that we want to stay above is 60 days above, 60 days cash on hand, and that's after our bond restriction. So that's kind of like our floor that we've established. Now, obviously, optimally, we want to be higher than that number, but that's our floor, so we're going to continue to monitor that number. So this kind of shows what's going on now. the biggest areas, you always see 19, 20, 21 are the ones that are in most flux, because that's the capital that's going on here. It changes so dynamically, and a lot of it's just when we get the payments, and operating is pretty static after a while. It's the capital, because we got so many things going on, and let's just say we pay something early, because that's what happened with our initial cash flow. We paid it a week early, and that impacted our cash flow significantly, because we thought we were going to pay it the following month. But that's really what you see there. But you see that's the key thing to keep in mind, at the bottom number of 28. Our number per day is 60,200 for operating expenses per day. So as an airport, you want to keep that in mind, because if for some reason the airport was shut down, there was an emergency and we couldn't fly anything, we needed to cover those expenses. So it's $60,200 a day that we have to cover regardless of revenue or not. So that's the number, and that's what 62.4 times 60,200 gives you roughly that number. It's a little bit more because of adjustment for next year. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, also the financial statements were posted in Novus. Everyone had a chance to take a look at them. Todd, anything you want us to focus on particular in the financials?
No, I think
We're pretty much covered.
I think we pretty much covered everything. I think overall, like I said, we are monitoring our cash. We're on target with our operating. We were very conservative in our operating. One of the things that's changed from last year to this year is we accrued out the pension expense, and that's a big number. Normally what happens is, if you follow our history, at the end of the year, we make money the first 9 months, and then the last part of the year is like, oh my God, what happened? Because we have our pension and a lot of back-end expenses. So what we did this year is try to smooth that out, so you have it each and every month, so you won't have those big numbers at the end of the year, where you kind of see it systematically. And we kind of projected that through this point of the year, we actually be losing money, and we're ahead of that.
Right, and that's important to note for exactly that reason. We have projected losses, and with accelerating the recognition of those expenses,
Right.
That's not been the case. We've been positive.
Right. So we're just trying to be as conservative and on point as we can.
Yep.
Any questions?
And one other thing, just to remind everyone, in Novus as well, we started this a few months ago in terms of developing an executive summary for the financial statements. Encourage everyone to spend time with that before you dive into the financials. If you pick out anything that you think we need to focus on more, please let us know. Let Eddie know, let Chuck know, let me know, and we'll make sure that we focus on that. I want to jump back to one number very briefly. Todd focused on it, and that's cash days on hand. To talk about where we were, if you go back to 2013, we had 3 days cash on hand. That was not a good time, for lack of a better term. We want to maintain that 60 days plus. That's an important number. Adds to the financial health, viability of the organization, and it also helps us in terms of borrowing costs. We're going to be talking a little bit later in regard to the financing proposal that we've received for financing the Hangar 11 project. The financial health of the organization drives that rate down dramatically, and for a project of that size, it's material. So, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Should I make a motion to approve, and then we can get into discussion, or do you want to? Yeah, why don't we just first make a motion to approve the treasurer's
So
report
moved.
as presented? So moved by Mike. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Questions and discussion, Brian?
Just a small question. So you mentioned that they look at the financial health of the organization. So what are the major benchmarks that they would look at for this type of organization for that rate?
So, from my perspective, I think they're looking at the financials, they're looking at cash flow, they're looking at passenger traffic, they're looking at the makeup of the passenger traffic, they're looking at the age and condition of the infrastructure. What am I missing, Todd? Those would be the major ones I'd look at it from a bank
Most of the stuff on
perspective.
our balance sheet, which you kind of covered.
And balance sheet.
Maybe our current ratio, which
Yeah.
is,
Other questions for John on the report? Hearing none, can we take a vote, please? All those in favor of approving the treasurer's report as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any dissenters? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much, John and Todd and team, for that very, very positive report. Appreciate it. Next order of business is Finance and Capital Planning Committee. John, I guess we're back over to you.
Yeah, keep rolling. Okay, we should have Scott Nickerson with Crow Horwath on the phone. Scott, are you there?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, sounds good. Scott and I had a conference call last week going over the 2017 financial performance of the, or financial statements of the organization, and he presented yesterday at exec and at finance and capital planning. So Todd, why don't you take it from there and run through our financial statements?
I think you meant Scott.
Oh, Scott, I'm sorry.
Sure. I did have the opportunity to present the overall financial statements and the qualitative aspects of the audit at the committee meeting yesterday. To provide you a brief highlight, we're happy to report that the Airport Authority received a clean opinion related to both your financial statements and related to your compliance with federal grants.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Scott.
That is something that should be...
What was that, Scott?
I think what Todd's saying is a clean opinion means that management reported the financials in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and the financials were deemed to be materially correct, once expected but not taken for granted. Secondly, I'm happy to report that there were no audit adjustments resulting from the audit process.
What was that, Scott?
So that's something that... I'll speak louder, I think, for Todd.
We can hear you, Scott, no worries.
I know. But what that means is that if I think about it from your perspective of being board members or committee members, what that is one sign that shows that the information you're getting throughout the year is not being adjusted for final financial statements, which I think is important as you guys rely on that information, budget to actual information, when you're making important decisions throughout the year. So I think that's one indicator of that type of quality of reporting. We're also happy to report that there were no significant difficulties or discussions or issues with accounting or financial reporting related to the financials. And then lastly, we did not see any qualitative issues related to any motivations to report one way or another to modify financial reporting to present the authority in one light versus another. So I think that's something that we always look at, especially if you have stakeholders such as bondholders, or you're doing potential financings, things like that. And so that can place another indicator of some assurance that outside stakeholders can use these financial statements to make decisions about financing decisions with the authority. That's the brief highlight. I believe that we did go into some discussions about future accounting standards that will impact the organization. The most significant one, I believe, is related to accounting for leases, which will be significant to all airport authorities across the country. But I won't bore you with all the details, but we do have time to implement that over the next 2 years, that it will have a significant impact on your balance sheet, because you'll have to recognize both an asset and a liability for any leases that you are the lessor or any leases that you're the lessee. And that's a mechanism that you've been using to finance some of your equipment purchases, and also as the primary tool for revenue generation for the organization.
And without going into...
I'm glad to answer any questions.
Yep. Scott, if I could expand on that briefly, without going into too much detail, it's GASB number 87 is the standard that's coming into play. Really all companies are facing it. It is dealing with regard to accounting for leases. Operating leases are off-balance sheet transactions, therefore they're not reflected in the financial statements, at least on the balance sheet, and the associated liability is not reflected in calculating financial covenants and ratios, things of that nature. GASB number 87 requires us to bring all of those onto the balance sheet, and therefore they will be calculated into our financial covenants, which are important because we've got certain ratios we need to meet with our bond placement. So we're working on that, on some projections in terms of where we will be in terms of those covenants and bringing those leases on balance sheet. And we'll have more for the board on that over the next couple of months.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board?
Just had a couple of other points to make to follow up on Scott's comment. Number one, we talked about external construction management and the organization bringing in, for example, working with Cushman and Wakefield on the real estate development project over on the other side of the multimodal facility. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've seen that as a common thread with the other airports where you have clients bringing in the external expertise when we're involved in large projects like that. Is that correct?
yes, one of the things that we've seen working with other airport authorities as well as other governments that are doing large construction projects or large activities, having that, what I call owner representation, is critical because most of the airport authorities don't have that expertise in-house. So I think it adds a level of confidence to provide oversight over general contractors, A&E firms, et cetera. And I think helps to mitigate the risk of cost overruns, as well as looking at contractual requirements and keeping your contractors on their toes, essentially. So I think that's becoming quite common to manage the complexities of doing construction projects these days.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple of other comments. No formal management letter. I think that's a testament to the strength both of the staff in terms of the work done in terms of the financial statements, but also we've got good oversight in place. Eddie is treasurer. I'm very fortunate to follow him because he's got a lot of the heavy lifting done already. But we've got a good finance and capital planning committee in place. We've got good board oversight and exec committee oversight. So that helps in terms of the quality of reporting. I think Scott mentioned at one point, we've got a couple of entries, a couple of areas where we rely on external help in terms of preparing entries. Very common for organizations our size and for nonprofits. It's not something we need to be concerned about, at least from our perspective. And the fact that there were no concerns regarding qualitative aspects, estimates, or judgments to me is a very strong statement because a lot of what we do is estimating. And the fact that it looks like we've got a good handle on that and that came through the audit process with a clean opinion, I think it's a good thing. So with that,
Right, and I believe the last item we discussed with the committee was related to continuing to invest in the finance and accounting area in relation to documenting policies and procedures to keep up with all the complexities of operating an airport authority, especially with all the changes you've been going through over the last 3 years. I know that Todd and Karen have been working to get that information better organized. So if there is a significant transition of staffing or changes within the organization, that the next person coming in would have a great place to start as far as understanding what has to happen on a day-to-day basis to support what you guys are doing operationally. And once again, that is something that is more characteristic of the small, lean size of your accounting and finance area, and it's viewed as a continuous improvement opportunity going forward.
Okay, thank you. John, thank you very much for that positive report. Todd, for the great work, continuing to improve our financing and our audit. With that, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the 2017 financial audit as presented.
So moved.
John, thank you. Can I get a second? Second, Jeff Matzkin. Any further discussion, questions on this matter?
I did want to bring up one thing. One of the things that Scott mentioned is that a lot of the stuff that we're doing internally, if you go back a few years and how much money we were spending on auditing fees, it was a lot more. It was almost double what we're spending now. So almost double what we're spending now because they were doing a lot of external stuff. So the fact that we're doing all that stuff in-house is saving us a lot of money. And they can actually focus on the audit as opposed to auditing their own work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we did change audit firms a while ago, and that has also probably contributed to the improvement, not only in how we're accounting for our figures, but the good job we're doing in-house as well.
And benchmarking against other airports, which we didn't have before.
Right. Yeah. Great. Very good catch. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Okay, let's take a vote. All those in favor of approving the 2017 financial audit as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any dissenters?
Aye.
Any dissenters? Okay, hearing none, motion passes. Again, thank you very much all for a great audit. Let's continue on to the next order of business. Amend the resolution 5086. John?
Yep. We are going to propose, we're going to discuss, actually, I should say, and hopefully approve amending resolution 5086, which has to do with financing for the Hangar 11 project. We did not have all the information at yesterday's Finance Committee meeting in order to come to the board with a formal recommendation for a structure. So we're going to have that discussion here because we do need to move the project along. Todd and I have had couple of conversations subsequent to yesterday's meeting, and I think we've got a good path outlined, but it does come without a vote at the Finance Committee. So with that, Todd, you want to take us
You're
through?
going to pull up that Excel sheet so that. What we did after discussion in yesterday's meeting is kind of summarize the two proposals. We actually received two proposals from BMO. One with 30-year kind of fixed out term with either 7 or 10 years kind of fixed based on swap rates. And then we also got first 2 years interest only. And then the extra 28 years kind of amortized out. So what you see here, go back to the Excel is really everything is, yeah, Excel. So the outlines of both of those plans are in Novus, but you can kind of see the highlights here. The first column B there, you'll see that is the interest rate of that particular term. So all these are based on swap rates. So we didn't buy a swap. That's just how the rates were determined. So if we don't go to final settlement until a month from now, they would adjust based on what happens with the swap rates. But it gives you a kind of comparative number. So this number here is the interest rate. This was the guaranteed term. This is interest only the first year. You have a yes or a no. And then one of the options they offered is to put $2.5 million into one of their bank accounts, to open up, they have a bank relationship with them. The interest rate is comparable to what we're getting on our AIP account, so that's kind of the interest lost is a non-issue. So we want to kind of walk through, this is 30 years, this is 10, this is 7. In all scenarios, the yeses win. So yes on interest only, just because we're not going to spend that money right away. It's going to take us some time to draw it down. And yes, we should put the money with them because that saves us money. The choice is 7-year guaranteed now or 10 years. In a rising interest rate environment, it's probably prudent to take the 10 because it's locked in, but we have both of these here. Now, anything we approve here will be subject to final approval with both from the judge and our bond counsel. So they will review the actual bond documents, the loan documents for final approval and language, but this is kind of spelling out the terms. You can see, as we talked about before, that 10 years, these are negative numbers, doesn't really pay out from a net present value for hangar development. 7 years, takes a long time for us to make money on this hangar development, and that's after the grant.
It's cash flow positive in year 4.
Yeah, it is cash flow positive. So if you pull up one of these, so that just pull one of them up here, you can start to see, like in here, year 4, it's positive, but the first few years, like you'll see, the debt service is negative, 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 until we kind of get it up to snuff. We got the bodies in there, and it's we got the full 80% occupancy that we assumed. That's when we start actually making some money after debt service.
Do you have any estimate on what the break even would be on 100% occupancy? Let's just say we're fortunate enough to have this thing fully.
I mean, it gets out there soon, and we did run some numbers, but that was so aggressive, so contrary to my nature. So
Sure.
Yes, 100% is great, but if we assume
The 50 is probably super conservative
Right.
from what we've heard so far, but I think it just makes sense to work on for that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think we definitely should use an 80%.
Right, but, I mean, obviously, we get there faster if we're at 100%. I mean, in some cases, we can actually go a little bit higher than 100%,
Yeah, you might
just
get up
because,
to 110.
the angles and the directions of where you put the planes. But
Oh, nice, okay.
for our, presentation to the bank, we could have said 150%. They would have said, this is fantastic, until they saw the 150%. And as John would tell you, he'd say, forget about it. So 80 and 50, if he was looking at this, he'd go, that's reasonable, that's not outrageous, and actually, you should beat that, and we should feel good about these numbers. So, go ahead.
We also built, if I could real quickly, just on the pro formas, if you look at year 7, column H, we also built in periods where we would see vacancy
Right.
increase, occupancy drop, and then kick back in. So we tried to be as conservative as we could in that part of it.
And that takes into account projections for business development.
Right. So again, this is your best guess, but, I mean, again, we could get to 100, I mean, we kind of know we're at 50% already, just based on, on commitments, but, we could get to 80, 85% in year 2, but at this point, we assume 50. So that's what we did for conservative purposes, but you can see, like I said, you're making money right here, but when you start figuring out the net, it takes a while before you actually cumulatively make a net present value positive. Any questions? Frank, you got that look like,
No, I think John answered.
Okay.
Your 7, right?
that
We
I
could jump
spy
back
look,
to-
yeah.
We can jump back to the interest rates here. We are assuming that this will be a taxable transaction.
Yes.
So we're building in taxable interest rates. We received a tax-free quote as well. The challenge we're going to run into, we're going to try one more time with our bond counsel, which is King Spry. The use of the building, which is what drives whether or not it's a taxable or tax-free transaction, is for private purposes. There will be private entities occupying the hangar. So we believe it will be taxable. We are going, and we've asked the question once.
Well,
We're
ask
going
it
to ask
again.
it one more time just to make sure. If we were able to get this as a tax-free transaction,
And then the numbers go
we
down.
drop those borrowing rates down about 100 to 125 basis points, if I remember correctly. So we will ask one more time, but the assumption is we're going to be taxable.
And again, this is all conservative assumption, as John said. I mean, we might even come up with some kind of partial tax number, but again, this is kind of worst-case scenario, 80% occupancy, taxable, and this is kind of how the numbers flow out. Any questions?
Todd, what rate of inflation did we estimate in here?
3%?
3%? Okay. And is it fixed throughout the term?
Yes, 3%, yes.
Yep, so again, this does not carry the recommendation of the Finance Committee because we didn't have the interest-only period options available for review yesterday. So, but I would, don't want to make a motion yet, Eddie, simply because I want to talk about the 7-year versus 10-year. The motion would include the term. If you could bring the spreadsheet back up, please, Sylvette. Todd brought up an interesting question. We are in a rising rate environment, and I think everyone's comfortable with that. Last forecast I saw is about 60% of the economists polled by, it was PNC and their economics group, projects the next recession to be in 2020. You know, economists are great at telling you what happened. I don't know that they're necessarily really good at telling you what's going to happen. But we're looking at making a determination here, not just in regard to where rates are headed now, but what we think is in the best interest of the organization out in that 7 to 10 year window. We're talking about the cost of the hedge essentially being 32 basis points on the rate for a 10-year fix versus a 7-year fix. My mortgage is fixed rate. I think probably everybody's mortgage is fixed rate. I like longer term fixed rates than I do shorter. To me, a 32 basis point cost for 3 years worth of interest rate hedge, I think is a good move. The drawback, though, and I got to point this out, is when we're talking about swap agreements, something goes wrong and rates drop dramatically, the cost to exit swap agreements is dramatic. So it's not something that we would have the opportunity to refi inexpensively if something went, if we saw rates drop dramatically out in that 2, 3, 4, 5 year time window. So that's the drawback.
And we know where they've been.
That's exactly right. And no one thought they could get that low.
We can evaluate that at the time. I mean, there'll be a cost presented to us at the time of in a lower interest rate environment. that
Right, and we make
a
the determination.
And a lot, though, will depend on what kind of payoff early agreement we can get into the actual contract. So if the interest rates go down and we're able to kind of get out early, then it makes sense for us to go with the higher rate because we know we can always get out if we need to. So a lot that goes back to reviewing the actual document. So why not lock it up and then, hey, guess what? Interest rates have lowered, get out, and then we go for something from that point from there.
So John, you're looking for now a general assent to move forward?
I think we're looking to give the judge and bond counsel, no, we're giving them authorization to move forward on the actual, I think we're saying the 10-year.
When do we think this would close?
We're trying to do this in 30 days.
Okay.
So
So we should probably get a motion going
Yeah.
to move this contingent upon a couple of
yeah.
variables that are important.
Dr. Green, bond counsel.
Yeah.
So
We pretty much believe will move us forward, right?
right, because that's going to take us a little time, but the actual closing should take 7 days. It's just a matter of the two councils, and they actually want to schedule like a phone call. We
So
can
can
kind
you-
of bang out most of this stuff. on the
Subject to
phone.
their approval, go ahead.
Yeah.
And they would have the final.
Yep, that's what we're looking for.
Yep. So I would move that we move forward with the 10-year guaranteed term, interest-only option at the presented rate of 532
Right.
with prevailing at close.
Yeah.
Subject to,
Subject to legal review and bond counsel review.
second by Jeff Manskin. Any further discussion on this topic? Questions, comments? Okay, hearing none?
Can I?
Yeah,
I do
Brian,
have
please,
one.
jump in.
The interest only I always just kind of perk up at that a little bit, and I don't know why, but what is the major negative that you see on doing the 10-year without the interest only for the first 2 years?
That is the interest only for,
Without it, not interested.
Basically, as I understand it right, we're looking to move forward on what, line 7?
line 7.
Yep.
Okay.
If you look at line 8.
What's the major disadvantage with line 8?
Cash flow.
Money.
If you look at the impact on cash flow, look at the factors in the 10-year column, you're looking at $850,000 cash flow short because you have accelerated the cash flow associated with the debt service. So where the interest-only period recaptures that in the back end of the transaction as opposed to the front end of the transaction. The benefit is you get the lower interest rate. You get 520 versus 532. So that factors into what Todd talked about when we went over the financial statements. Want to make sure that the economics on this are a little bit longer term than you would look at from a private perspective, because hangars are a unique asset. So we wanted to make sure that we build in a little bit of a longer lease-up period. From a private perspective, if we were building an office building and we're looking at 4 years to cash flow break even, the answer is probably no. That's not quick enough. But with a specialized asset like this, it will take longer to lease up than would be ordinarily the case. So the interest-only period gives us the ability to preserve cash up front while we're going through that period, lessens the pressure on days cash on hand. We want to make sure we maintain that 60-plus day at a relatively minor cost when you're talking about 12 basis points on the cost.
Okay. Thank you. That's some clarification on
Yep,
that.
absolutely.
Well, Brian, that's great. Thanks for asking that question.
Definitely.
And we're fortunate to have a few individuals on our board who have expertise and financial acumen. So, Mike, I hate to put you on the spot, but I'd like to get your opinion before we lock and load on this one.
No, I'm good with that.
Mike's a CPA and has experience in this area as well, so happy to get his second opinion on this. You good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion on this matter? Okay, let's take a vote. All those in favor of moving forward with the options as presented, contingent upon our legal and bond counsel approval, please say aye.
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 Any dissenters? Hearing none, motion passes. John, Todd, thank you very much for the detailed presentation, and happy to hear moving forward. Okay, so next order of business, I believe we are going to cover the runway 624 rehabilitation.
Yes.
So
yes.
over to you, Tom.
Sure. Well, I'll pass this off to Ryan. He can walk us through some slides on this very important project, multi-year project, and this is our primary runway here at ABE. So, Ryan.
We'll say very briefly, it was a fascinating presentation yesterday that we got at Finance and Capital Planning. This is obviously a very important project at the airport, and there are a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine, because we want to stay open, right? So,
exactly.
With that, Ryan?
Yes, thank you. That's a good segue. So, kind of give a brief overview. Some of you might have seen this before, others might be new, but I think it was a good overview that we just wanted to show some progress of this next multi-phase construction project that we're going through. So, kind of the background, why are we doing the project? Existing conditions is the pavement has a need of being rehabilitated and repaired, as you can see from the photos, a lot of the crack sealant and some minor patch repairs. This is our pavement condition index. Obviously red's bad, green is good. You can see a lot of the red over here, but basically 624 is the magenta, yellow and red color. So it's in need of some serious rehabilitation. Another piece that we looked at, we talked about the master plan effort that we're doing, is we want to make sure that the pavement that we're designing for is a 20-year life minimum. So what we're also doing is accounting for the increase in commercial and cargo operations that we're projecting for the next 20 years. As you can see, kind of the uptick in those numbers. As part of that, though, however, we're also looking at the average weight of aircraft. Aircraft are basically just getting heavy over time. Based on those operations, you can see A fully loaded A300 is around 370,000 pounds. 767 with cargo is over 400,000 pounds versus, again, some of the smaller aircraft that are below 200,000 pounds. So we want to make sure that we're accounting for that weight so the pavement doesn't deteriorate faster than it should, and we're getting the most out of our investment. So brief summary of our existing conditions is based on our aircraft design group category here at ABE. We should have runway shoulders. We currently do not. Our vehicle service road is inside our runway safety area, which is an FAA design deficiency, which needs to be corrected. Non-standard grading, drainage inside the safety area, which you'll see what that means in a minute. And we talk a lot about soil, or we have a lot lately. Sinkholes are part of that discussion as well that we want to make sure we're accounting for correctly. So a lot of detail here, but basically what we're doing, I talked to some about it, is the big thing is really meeting the FAA design standards. So because they're giving us 90% of the funding for the project, we have to meet their design criteria. So again, they say, yep, do it, make sure it meets it, but then obviously they're committing to giving us the funding by having us correct those issues. The big thing actually with this is a new drainage system. So the inlets, which you'll see in a minute, are actually in the pavement. They need to be outside the safety area, so that's a big push as well. And with everything, electrical upgrades, want to be more efficient. We're looking at LED lighting. Again, environmental permitting compliance, you'll see in a minute what that means. 4 packages, we're considering construction cycles that breaks down each category. The funding is something we're still working on with the FAA in terms of timing, and I'll go through that a little bit later. But because of the breadth of scope, we need to phase it out, and operationally you'll see as well. So very high level, you'll see the current pavement has a W section. Here's the inlets in the pavement. So this first package 1, which we're currently, it's out on the street for bid right now, is primarily all the red, regrading our safety area, moving the inlets outside of the safety area, relocating, realigning our service road. And then the big piece, as John mentioned, to make sure we don't close the heart of the airport, our intersection, we're going to repave to make sure that that's done correctly and first, so that we don't have any issues, because if something happens in the intersection, we are basically closed. Package 2, which will be into 2019, is getting rid of that W section now that the new inlets are in place, and then building up the pavement to get more of a typical V crown going forward. So you can see all the green and lighting improvements as we go as well. Package 3 is beefing up or making thicker that pavement section based on the requirements that I mentioned earlier. What our consultants have basically said, depending on the base, we're adding anywhere between 6 to 9 inches of asphalt across that entire 7,600 feet of runway. So it's a pretty substantial lift. And then package 4 is basically coming down with the final grade, again adding some more strength, and then adding those shoulders that we talked about, 25 feet on either side, which actually helps with some of that erosion control that we're talking about moving forward. Progress to date, again, constantly refining the scopes and different packages. The stakeholder coordination is really ongoing. We've had quite a few airline meetings with staff, consultants, and the airline representatives, talking with the FAA from the funding perspective, and even the local tower to make sure that we're coordinating the construction impacts, which I'll go into here in a minute. Site investigation I'll get into is complete, which gave us a lot of good information going forward. So the one thing to keep in mind here is, as we're doing this, it's our primary runway, we're trying to limit the operational impacts. So as we mentioned, the intersection we're looking to do in the spring of 2019, so in May timeframe, a 52-hour, or consultants like to refer to as a planned snow event. We basically tell them these are the 2 dates. We'll have a first weekend, and then there's a backup date in case there's weather or other complications, that they won't schedule flights during that time frame. So they have agreed to that with a 6-month advance notice, so that's what we've been working through, making sure that they're on point with that. And then in terms of all the other work that's within the safety area, we have 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. construction window. So every night, runway will be closed during that duration. Every day, it's back open again, can accommodate the regular traffic. So that piece will become very critical when we get into the paving portion, because you're doing a lot of tie-ins and grading and making sure that it's safe to open up every day. Here's kind of what I, excuse me, what I mentioned before, but generally what package 1 will include: kind of the shaded RSA grading area, the intersection pavement, and then our vehicle service road realignments. All right, geotech, we talk a lot about soil. We've been talking about contingencies a lot lately, but the big thing with this, because we're moving the drainage, is we got to make sure we're accounting for sinkholes. This is a very sinkhole-prone area with the karst geology, and we want to make sure that we're accounting for what we need to, excuse me, but also meeting the Conservation District and the Planning Commission requirements for stormwater management. Not to bore too much with the details, but these are kind of some of the previous sinkhole areas that we've actually got in the past with the orange and green, and then some kind of pockets that have popped up. So before we even put a shovel in the ground and start moving dirt, we know there have been issues. So the consultants worked very closely with our geotechnical firm as part of this project to really get a gauge of what's out there and what we're dealing with. So very high level, this is, the circles are kind of borings that we did, obviously to get the pavement thicknesses, but then where we're putting some of the drainage, what does it look like underground to make sure that we're not incorporating sinkholes where we don't want them.
Oh, we should say, Ryan, not just sinkholes, but also soil conditions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and to that point, what we did with this, which was a big lessons learned from our other projects, is using more of the ground penetrating radar, magnetometer technology to see what you can't see underground. So basically, again, the orange and red are bad in terms of pockets that exist. You can kind of see it. It really goes up and down as you go. So we wanted to make sure where we're putting some of the drainage, and then we did borings to confirm what the data was showing us. We wanted to make sure that where we're putting drainage, we're not making it worse for the sinkholes and that type of thing, but then designing around it should we encounter it, and I'll go into that a bit later of some of the geotech piece. So project schedule at this point, we actually have a pre-bid meeting this Thursday. We're looking to get bids in hand for package 1, middle of June. And the reason we're timing that is for FA grant application. They have a deadline beginning of July that you can't miss. You have to have the bids in hand before you can submit the grant application. So working through that, working through the permitting right now as well with the Conservation District and Planning Commission, as well as conversations with the township to make sure they're squared away with that. The first package, we're looking to start construction this September, which is a lot of the RSA grading, vehicle service road alignment, and then as I mentioned, the spring will be the intersection pavement. But then again, as we mentioned, all the different packages, we got to look forward and start design of package 2 in the fall of this year to keep things moving for basically a mirrored cycle next year for the grant bids and so forth and so on. Again, I mentioned the intersection closer. Here's the dates that we've provided to the airlines currently, which they've agreed to, and we'll just keep having those conversations as we go. I did mention the current package 1 has about, I think it's about 1.8 million contingency for geotech issues that they may encounter, whether it's unsuitable soil, sinkholes, other things that they need to address on the fly. Given those small construction closure windows, we want to make sure that they have the items in there so we're not going back and forth on unit costs and other pieces. I think that's actually it. So again, brief update, but we'll definitely be providing information as we go. Again, once we get the bids in hand, that'll be another discussion of where we are. But just as another reminder, it's included in our capital budget or our program. The overall package is about estimated $44 million project, but 90% of that comes from the FAA, so about 39.4 million. So that's something that we account for. Again, we account for it in the cash flow once we start getting the bids in hand. So it's a very important project, a big one, but again, our consultants have done a really good job helping us coordinate with the airlines, coordinate getting the information out, and there'll be more to come, I think, with tenants as well, as we've talked about getting that information to them so they know when it's happening and durations. So that's all I had. If anyone has
Ryan,
any
thanks for the presentation. Questions, comments?
Cargo has become an important revenue item here. Does this present a significant impact on cargo operations?
No, they've been part of the meetings as well, part of the discussion, and that's really where that 11 to 6 window came from.
Okay.
Is working around the larger aircraft that are really relying on 624. Some of the other carriers can use 1331, no issues, but the cargo,
Have to use that.
yeah.
Ryan, as a refresher, what time do the runways close on an average daily basis?
They don't.
So we are just scheduling outside of those hours?
Yeah, they're typically, there is that window 11 to 6. There are some operations that come in. I think there's a arrival around midnight.
There's a couple midnight arrivals, but
Yeah.
they'll be able to use the crosswind runway.
Yeah, but they can use the crosswind, so we're kind of working around that least impact. If it made sense to do it between noon and 6, we would do that as well. So it's really just lessening the impact on it.
Is aircraft with emergency, could we accommodate that or not?
Depending on what's going on that day with the construction, but that's something that will work out as well on a daily basis when we get into closing the runway. If weather isn't favorable, for example, for an aircraft that's coming in at midnight, we maybe shift it back a couple hours.
Depending on what we're doing too, we could move equipment outside the safety area
Yeah.
and open the runway.
Okay.
Yeah,
There's always the crossing runway available too.
That's correct.
yeah,
Except during the intersection closure, then we're offline.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of this too gets review from a construction safety phasing plan with the FAA, so they buy into some of those things, and I think that's part of the item is, in an emergency, what do you do? So, yeah.
I just have a curiosity question.
Yeah.
This is quite an undertaking here. When they do this, when they resurface, do they go over the existing runway is there, or do they break it up in some way, or? how
Yeah,
does that work?
they mill out basically, a couple inches of the bad sections, and then they build it up from there. So because we're reopening, we're not ripping everything out and starting over, but we're building on top of what's.
How thick is the total runway? How thick is the runway?
Currently, it varies, but it's anywhere between, I want to say, 12 to 18 inches when you account for the base part of it, and then, like I said, they're adding a good amount of pavement as well.
I seem to remember that he said he was going to add 6 to 9 inches.
Right. Yeah, so he's going to add that on top of some of the areas, and it was good we did the borings, because even though we had the design drawings, because of, we all know that the conditions change out in the field, the varying depths changed as we went, so they wanted to accommodate for that, so the quantities they have were tight.
Well done.
So.
It was fast slow conditions?
Yes, yeah, they said about 1.8 million they were throwing in there. And we've had discussions with the FAA because typically they don't like to include contingencies, or at least not that big of amount. But given what we've encountered in the past and the sensitivity of when the runway's closed, we want to make sure we can make those improvements quickly. We made sure to work through that with them.
One thing that was raised yesterday, it was a really fascinating discussion yesterday, as you can see today, but when that intersection is closed, obviously we're all on pins and needles because it's literally shutting down the airport for a few hours, and there is a contingency in place in case something goes wrong, and it's not rescheduled for opening. So I think what was fascinating to me was the contractor, as part of the agreement, is liable for every 15 minutes or so that the airport is not open, and at a pretty high rate. So above and beyond, obviously, all the planning and the schedules, there's a major financial incentive for the contractor to make sure that that schedule is met.
Yeah.
It was 1,000 every 15 minutes, correct? $1,000?
Right, and it's based, what Todd even mentioned before, that $60,000 a day, using that
It's
as
a
an
little bit more than
assumption.
60,000, but don't tell anybody.
Right. But no, that's a good point. That's a good point, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very good presentation, Ryan.
Sure.
52 hours seems like a lot if we're just milling the top, though. If you're not going into subbase at all or re-rolling. You're going to mill the top 4 9 inches and roll it?
Yeah, but we're also doing part of 1331 as well because the intersection is closed.
Okay. So you have to do both. You have to do both in order to create that junction.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of transitions and grading work to be figured out as part of that, plus some in-pavement lighting that has to be.
Okay. So it's just not a mill and pave.
Right.
There's a lot more to it.
Right. Yep.
Center line lights.
It's not a parking
Correct.
lot.
Right.
But
It's not a parking lot.
no, but I've done highway. Right. You can do highway if you've got it milled out right. You can do highway. You can do a mile in several, a few hours. You can do it less than a day, 12 hours. So, all right.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Ryan. So before we continue, I just wanted to interject one point that wasn't on the agenda formally, but it was part of our advertisement in our board meeting. We were going to address the Vertiview lease at Queen City. However, yesterday at our committee meetings, we had discussions on the matter. We haven't yet come to conclusion on them, so we are going to postpone that, I guess, action item for our next board meeting, hopefully. But continued positive discussion on trying to get that deal done, so to speak, at Queen City. So more to come at the next meeting. Any questions on that subject? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to pass the floor to Tom for the director's report.
Sure, thank you. So as John mentioned, another great April, 17.2% increase in our passenger activity. More specifically, we talk about Allegiant and the growth that we've seen there, but I think it's important to note American's growth this past April, 37.6% up over the previous April. So very significant jump. We had 46 additional flights versus last April from American, most of that to Charlotte. But that's a significant jump, but we saw that from all of the legacy carriers. United up about 14% and Delta up about 4%. We see those trends continuing into even the third quarter with some 3 to 4% increase in seats, available seats here. So good sign overall that the legacy carriers continue to do well as Allegiant.
How does that square with the consultant that presented last month that mentioned that there'd be an increase in American activity in Philadelphia?
Sure. So we did see some increase to Philadelphia. I think the other piece of this is one of the things from that presentation you'll recall, and I think even one of the slides we just talked about for the runway presentation shows the retirement of those 50-seat regional jets and really upgauging now to some larger aircraft. We saw the retirement of the Dash 8, the turboprop, and so over time we're seeing those upgauging of the size of aircraft that are operating here, and that's across their networks, but again, it's certainly having an impact here. In addition to that, I did want to mention, since our last meeting, staff attended Aviation Advocacy Day in Harrisburg and had an opportunity to meet with state legislators, talk about some issues specific to ABE in Queen City and Braden, but also more specific to aviation within the state. And so I think it was time well spent and a lot of good dialogue at the state capitol. We also had our Wings for All event, which was a great event on May 5th. And we appreciate also the opportunity to have some board members there and do a ribbon cutting for our new sensory room. That was a great little piece I think we had in the press, and great amenity to have at an airport our size. Third airport in the world to have a sensory room. So next to Shannon, Ireland, and Atlanta Hartsfield, there's ABE. So pretty exciting to have that and help folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities just relax and get rid of some anxiety after a security checkpoint prior to their flight. So that was excellent. Also, we had our master plan workshop May 10th, and that was a public workshop here in the terminal. Great attendance, over 100 persons attended, and a lot of good comments and feedback. So we continue to receive comments for that on our website. If folks are interested in reviewing any of the documents, they're online. flylvia.com, they can review those and certainly continue to submit comments. In terms of upcoming events, June 12th, we have another Fear of Flying seminar. So I know Darren doesn't have a fear of flying, but I think you're going to be involved, right? So,
flying, I'll make sure you are by the time we're done.
And so that'll be right here at ABE. So looking forward to doing another one of those. June 14th, Ryan mentioned we do have our bid opening for the Runway 624 project, so more to follow on that. We're excited to have good participation in the bids. Also another TSA pre-check enrollment center coming up in June, this 18th through the 29th. So if you haven't spent your $80 with TSA to get your pre-check, there's an opportunity to do that, good for 5 years, and certainly a service we provide here at ABE.
I'll put in a plug. I did it, and it took 5 minutes in and out.
In and out.
They're set up very well.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
What's the date on that again?
So that's June 18th through the 29th.
And that registration is open now.
Online. Online registration.
We can send the link out to everybody.
Yeah, I think we typically have that link available through our website as well. And I think those are the highlight reels, in terms of what I wanted to cover today, but I'm happy to answer any questions or.
Thank you for that report. Tom, any questions, comments on the director's report? Great. Thank you again, staff, and great job. Solicitor's report, Judge.
I request an executive session. At this point, I want to discuss litigation matter, and it relates to the storm water management charge that's been imposed by the city of Allentown. So I'm going to have an executive session.
Can I get a motion, please, to go into executive session? Frank, thank you very much. Second by Mike Schwer. Okay, thank you. If I could just- Judge?
During the executive session, we discussed a litigation matter involving the Allentown stormwater ordinance and its impact on the airport authority because of the Queen City property. And we also discussed the ongoing labor management negotiations with the firefighters.
Thank you. So I move that the solicitor be authorized to file an action to assert LNAA's immunity from the Allentown stormwater management charge. May I get a second, please? Second. Second from John. Open to discussion on the matter. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, let's take a vote. All those in favor of authorizing the solicitor as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Any dissenters? Hearing none, motion passes. And I think that pretty much is our agenda for today. Can I get a motion to conclude our meeting?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Mike? I think that's it pretty much. Everyone else, have a good day, good meeting. Thank you. We'll see you next month.